kind of reflects on what Kate is doing. Technologically, this is what's going to be coming more and more in the future, as you will instruct them, all your instructors.
Congratulations. Many of you have seen at some point in your life an animated movie, whether it's Toy Story, How to Train Your Dragon, or anything from the animation dominance of the field, such as Pixar and DreamWorks. However, not many people know how much time and effort goes into making an hour-and-a-half long movie such as this. I tried for my senior project to make just a fraction of that. I wanted to make a little 8-minute movie on Edgar Allan Poe's The Raven. We'll get further into that a little later. So, last year, for my English class, we had to read The Raven. And in my head, I was thinking, I can visualize everything that they're talking about. I'd like to see this done as a small movie. And so, just using this, I was able to get ideas. The first thing you have to do when you want to do such a feat is you have to think of characters. And after you've thought of characters, you start to draw them. These are creepy drawings, but people read my comics anyways. So with this, I had to think of who is the main character. What does he look like? What is he wearing? What's going on? And so I decided that the main character is, I wanted him to be a caricature of Edgar Allan Poe. And so one of the big things I always think about with Poe is he's generally frightened from things going on in his story, so he would have large eyes. So I drew him with large eyes. Now, after you've gone and made all of this concept art, you have to start putting it into more of a digital form through scanning in drawings, and then you start modeling. But before that, you have to kind of translate what the story is into a sort of comic through a storyboard. This is where I believe I did the best part of my work, because this is what I do every day. I draw comics. That's what I do. And with the storyboard, what it is you draw the scene, what's going on, and beneath it you draw a brief little summary of what's going to happen in the scene. How will the camera act? What words will be said? Just brief actions. You just need a short little bit of what's going on so you know how the scene will act out. Now, after you've done that, now is when you start modeling. Something that I find really interesting is with modeling, you have many different ways of doing it, and you can still get to the same thing. There are two different popular types of modeling. One is called the basic primitive. It's when you start with a simple box, add edges to it, and just after a little bit, you get a book. And then the next part, it's called strip modeling. Ooh, fun name. You start with a simple plane, and you extrude off the faces and edges, and you create the book, or whatever you wish, by hand. You start with one face, and you create the whole object. Generally, there's different ways to use each one, such as for the basic primitive, it's more for inorganic objects, such as books. Things that require lots of symmetry or just hard surface materials. Things that are organic, such as people, birds, anything. You're going to want to use strip modeling for that. Now, after you've gone and made all your models, you have to texture them. A texture is a 2D representation of detail. Once you have your model, you have to unwrap it in some sense. What this is doing is, say I have the model of a head. I have to be able to flatten it out so that I can color on it through a program such as Photoshop. This is the diffuse map for Edgar Allan Poe's head. To you, it might look a little creepy, but to me, I understand what's going on here. What's going on is, I've taken the head, and I've flattened it out along the chin and along the back of the head. And with unwrapping it, I can now color onto it, and when I reapply this texture, onto the model, it'll take on a more detailed look, with things that I wouldn't be able to do through modeling due to limitations of engines and everything else. Now, after you've made all your models is when you start to animate things. There are different ways, just like in modeling, different ways to animate things. One of the more popular ways that saves the engine from having to run so many calculations is through these things called bones. A bone is, in some sense, what it sounds like. It is an object that you put into the model, and it will take the mesh around it, and it will deform it depending on how you move it. This is a simple hand that I made for Edgar Allan Poe. And with these bones, after you've gone and weighted them onto the model, you can start to manipulate the hand, such as this. With what it does, while in today's age, it doesn't really add much more to it, because what a bone does is it allows you to deform your model, and it takes kilobytes of space. While moving vertices around, that would take megabytes of space. In the 90s, that was everything, because computers could only process so much. But today, it's not as important because we have such strong processors, and we can calculate many equations in a fraction of the time that it took someone in the 90s. As you can see, those are the bones in action. Now, that's fun, and it's simple. But let's say I want to spice things up a bit. Good job to you. Now, bones are nice for like moving an arm, moving a leg, but our face is something everyone looks at, and we all pull things out of what we see in someone's facial expression. Going back to what Ashley said, we are very visual with how we see people, and so bones aren't going to work for a face. What you need for a face is called facial morphers. Going into what Matt will talk about in a little bit. As in kindergarten, we learn what shape we make with our mouth as we say words, such as if we want an O sound, we go O. If we want an A, we go ah. Or a TH, you stick your tongue between your teeth and go fun. Now, you can get by with roughly 12 different phonic spaces, but for my project, I used 34. Now, roughly only 8 of them are for sounds, the others are for facial expressions. What a morpher does is it takes your basic head and you tell it, look at this one, and it gives you a slider between 0 and 100%. When you move the slider to 100%, this model will now look like that model. I used it because when I modeled Edgar Allan Poe's face, he had bug eyes. They were completely open, and he had a very surprised look on his face. And I realized if you wanted to relate to the character, he has to take on a more relaxed state when he's not doing anything. So, with facial morphers, I was able to make any expression I wanted. Something between happy, sad, mad, surprised, just any facial expression I could think of, I could make within a couple slides of the mouse. This, to me, was a huge advancement over what I had had previously, because if I had wanted to do that, I would have had to make a new head, or just the same head, and animate every vertex around as I wanted. Instead, I could just make a copy of the head and tell it, look at this, and I could make any facial expression I wanted, even if it's somewhat creepy. It's fun to look at. Now, after you've created all your characters and all your assets, you have to decide, well, I've designed all this. Now I need a world that he'll live in. And something that's a lot of people look over in such a field such as this is every ray of light and every blade of grass has to be thought of for it to work in a 3D realm. Everything has to be considered. I made my movie, tried to make my movie, in the Valve's Half-Life 2 engine, the Source engine. And this is their world editor. To you, this might look complicated, but to me, I can read this like a book, much like code. This character right here is your camera. This is where you will be created inside the world. You can move around, you can look up, down, anything you want. These things right here are called scripted sequences. What happens is when your character touches the table, Edgar Allan Poe, who is sitting at his chair just minding his own business, will hear a knock on the door. He will follow this path to this scripted sequence. Upon reaching this scripted sequence, it is told him, the actor, to open the door, play this animation, and the door will open. Upon that, he will jump simultaneously to the next scripted sequence where he looks outside the door. And he will sit in that loop because I wanted to change camera angles until I go into the hallway and touch another trigger where he'll leave and the door will close. He'll walk back to his desk where he ponders, what was that noise I just heard? I don't get what's going on here. And a tap at the window will sound, and he will look surprised, his eyes will open, and he kind of looks around his surrounding area. Where he would go over to the window, and upon reaching that point, he would open the window, and a raven would fly in, follow this path, and land on the bust of Athena. This took more time than anything I was expecting. I figured I could get this whole thing done in about 8 months or the school year. Modeling took a long time. Took a long time to figure out how to get everything into the source engine. Upon finally reaching it is when I made the most progress. But looking at other people who have made movies in the source engine, they said, well, yes, it is a nice engine for games and for short movies. It's a pain. They don't like it. They have decided that, well, yes, it has all these nice features. Not the best. Now, along with humans being very visual, we also listen to things, and that is where we pull half of what we understand. So, to have a good movie that you can relate to, you need to have music, sound. And the key thing is to have a good actor that can portray the character is happy right now or sad right now. You don't get to see them, so they can only lend their voice. For my movie, I had Mr. Bass read the poem for me. I think he did an amazing job. But it just goes to show that he had to plan about a week in advance. He asked me all these questions such as, okay, how is he going to sound at this point? Should I be louder or softer here? What is the overall feeling of Poe? He both voices Poe and the narrator, but in some sense, it's one and the same. Mr. Brisk was nice enough to let us use our facilities at Jeff after school one day to record this. We found out a lot of things, such as we don't really know where the files get stored after we record them, because we took about 20 minutes just to find them and get them. But it was a good experience in the end. Finally, I wasn't able to finish the movie to the extent that I wanted, but I did learn about the process of how to make an animated movie. And at some point in time, I would like to create this to the extent of what I had originally envisioned.